4:17 a.m., Fort Wayne, Indiana. The first Homeland Security Investigations vehicle rolled to a stop 1 block east of the Jumpin Junction on Coldwater Road. No emergency lights. No sirens. 14 agents in tactical gear stepped onto the asphalt in near silence and moved toward the building in 2 staggered lines, weapons at low ready. At that same moment, in Indianapolis, Evansville, Merrillville, Terre Haute, Muncie, and Bloomington, 6 additional tactical teams were doing the same thing. 7 buildings, 7 breach teams, 1 command net counting down to simultaneous entry, 3 federal agencies, 73 agents, 1 compressed 45-second window to execute what would become the largest coordinated tactical operation in Indiana federal enforcement history. In the Fort Wayne staging lot, the team leader raised a closed fist, held it for 3 seconds, then dropped it. 19. Every agent in every staging lot across 5 Indiana cities knew the number. 4:17 a.m. They moved. Retention, Conchick Hook. What brought federal agents to a regional chain of family trampoline parks isn't a federal database or a surveillance feed. These were businesses with 5-star Google reviews, birthday party packages starting at $240, foam pit arenas, and Ninja Warrior obstacle courses. But the story began with a 19-year-old kid working the overnight maintenance shift for $11 an hour and a single object left on a hallway carpet sometime between midnight and 5 in the morning. Size 4. Found outside a locked door on the 2nd floor of a building that was supposed to be empty. The person who found it didn't know what it meant. He photographed it from 3 angles with his phone. Then he finished mopping the corridor and called his uncle on the drive home. That phone call, made in the pre-dawn darkness of a late February morning in 2026, would eventually reach the desks of Homeland Security investigations analysts, who had been building a parallel from 7 different locations across Indiana on a single morning and to one of the more consequential federal trafficking prosecutions in the Midwest in recent years. Retention, 030 resolution Ts. Marcus T. was 19 years old when a staffing agency placed him at Jumpin Junction's Indianapolis flagship location in October of 2025. The park had recently expanded its north wing, adding a 2nd foam pit and an extended Ninja Warrior obstacle course. The overnight maintenance rotation required 1 to 2 workers to cover the full facility: main floor, secondary arena, bathrooms, the upstairs corridor. Marcus was assigned the full building route. His shift supervisor walked him through the entire facility on his first night. 1st floor, bathrooms, concession area, party rooms, equipment storage. Then upstairs, staff break room, utility closet, and at the end of a short corridor, 2 private offices with heavy doors and commercial deadbolts that were visibly not standard retail hardware. Administrative use only. Management handles that area. Cleaning crew doesn't go up there. Marcus didn't question it. In his experience with large facilities, administrative spaces sometimes operated on their own cleaning schedule. Day management, not overnight contract staff. He'd worked at a convention center for 3 weeks the prior summer. This wasn't unusual. For 4 months, from October of 2025 through late February of 2026, Marcus worked the overnight route at the Indianapolis flagship on a regular schedule. He mopped the corridor outside the office doors. He emptied the break room trash. He replaced towel rolls in the bathrooms. He checked the foam pits for debris before clocking out. He never tried either office handle. He had no reason to. On the morning of February 27, 2026, at approximately 3:45 a.m., Marcus was finishing the upstairs corridor when something on the carpet stopped him. He almost swept past it with the mop. He was tired. It was 4 hours into the shift. Then he stopped and looked. Size 4. The Velcro strap was partially undone. There was a small cartoon character printed on the toe strap, the kind of shoe sold in discount retail stores, individual shoes constantly. The kind parents buy in bulk. Mark stood in the corridor for nearly a full minute. He had locked the upstairs corridor door himself when he arrived at 11 p.m. the previous evening. This was on his documented arrival checklist, a standard procedure he completed at the start of every shift, initialing the form and leaving it with the security log sheet on the ground floor. No one had come through since. He would have heard the stairwell door. He would have seen motion on the interior camera feed accessible from his phone, which all overnight maintenance staff received for personal safety. And the sandal hadn't been there at 11. He photographed it from 3 angles. Then he went downstairs and finished his shift without saying anything to anyone. On the drive home at 5:20 a.m., he called his uncle. Retention, point, 4 stakes, bend. Corporal Dennis T. of the Indiana State Police was off duty that morning. He had been asleep when his nephew called. He listened to the full description: the locked corridor, the camera access, the timing, the door that was never cleaned, and asked 3 questions. Was the office door locked or open? Locked. Was the sandal inside the door or outside in the corridor? Outside. Had Marcus touched it? No. Don't say anything to your supervisor. Don't go back upstairs before your next shift unless your normal route requires it. If anyone asks, your shift was entirely normal. Then he ended the call and sat on the edge of his bed for a moment. He pulled up the contact information for a connection at the Indianapolis HSI field office, a number from a joint operation 2 years prior, and sent a message asking to speak by phone within the hour. The analyst at HSI who took that call that morning ran a search on Jumpin Junction Family Entertainment before noon. Within 18 hours, the name had been escalated to HSI Special Agent Linda Carver, who was assigned to lead an expanded inquiry by the end of the same business day. The reason? HSI Indianapolis had been running a parallel investigation since spring of 2025, tracking what analysts described as a Central American trafficking logistics network operating through northern Indiana. The investigation was at mid-stage, solid movement pattern data, no confirmed intake locations. Analysts had flagged a cluster of recurring anomalies in the northern Indianapolis corridor: cell tower pings from unregistered phone numbers, fuel card purchases along specific highway sequences, and nocturnal vehicle stops near commercial buildings documented as closed during the relevant hours. None of those stops had previously been matched to a named business. Jumpin Junction's North Indianapolis flagship address matched 3 separate flagged data points in the existing investigation file. Special Carver's first action was to pull building permits for all 7 Jumpin Junction locations. She was looking for a specific modification: any permitted work performed on second-floor office spaces after each location's initial build-out. 5 of the 7 locations had filed permits for administrative office renovation within 60 days of opening. The permits listed standard work: drywall partitioning, supplemental HVAC units, recessed lighting upgrades, and acoustic panel installation described in the filing language as noise management for administrative staff working above the entertainment floor. That last item, acoustic panels, was the one Carver returned to. She pulled contractor records for all 5 renovation permits. 3 of the 5 jobs had been completed by a single subcontracting firm registered in Cincinnati, Ohio. That firm had dissolved in December of 2025. 2 of the 5 renovation jobs had received final sign-off from a county building inspector who had retired abruptly and without notice in November of 2025, 7 weeks before the HSI investigation that would eventually place his name in federal court filings. She requested the material specifications from the acoustic panel line items. What she found wasn't consistent with standard commercial noise mitigation. Consumer-grade acoustic foam tiles, the kind installed in conference rooms, podcast studios, and open-plan offices above busy retail, reduce sound transmission by 15 to 25 decibels. The materials specified in the Jumpin Junction permits were industrial specification acoustic dampening systems rated at 47 to 52 decibel reduction. The kind installed in recording studios, sensitive government communication facilities, and spaces specifically designed to prevent sound from leaving or entering. Trampoline parks are loud. On trampoline surfaces can push ambient noise levels to 90 decibels in active operation. Offices above that noise floor are genuinely difficult working environments. Acoustic treatment is legitimate. But the performance specification on these panels wasn't designed to make an office quieter for the person working inside it. A 49 decibel reduction in a 90 decibel environment doesn't produce a comfortable workspace. It produces near silence, a room where no sound enters from outside and no sound leaves. I spent hours going through those permit filings, and one detail kept nagging me, not the acoustic rating itself, but the sequence. Every renovation permit was filed within 45 days of a location opening its doors to the public, before any management team could have determined whether their administrative offices were actually too noisy to work in. Someone specified industrial-grade sound isolation before the first customer walked into those parks. That isn't reactive building management. That's operational planning. The surveillance application went to a federal judge in Indianapolis on March 4, 2026. By March 7th, court-authorized thermal imaging was active at 4 of the 7 Jumpin Junction locations. Thermal imaging surveillance operates by detecting heat signatures through exterior building walls. It doesn't produce visual images or audio. It produces one piece of data, the presence or absence of human-sized body heat in a designated space, cross-referenced against the building's documented operational schedule. What agents found at the Indianapolis and Fort Wayne locations over the first 10 days of observation was consistent, specific, and alarming. On 3 separate overnight windows, a Tuesday to Wednesday, the following Wednesday to Thursday, and the subsequent Sunday overnight, thermal sensors registered 2 to 4 human-sized heat signatures in the second-floor office spaces at the Indianapolis flagship during hours when the building was documented as locked, alarmed, and empty. The signatures were stationary for periods of 1 to 3 hours, then absent. The pattern wasn't residual warmth from daytime occupancy. Equipment radiates in a different thermal signature profile than the human body. Investigators confirmed this through baseline calibration readings at unoccupied times. These signatures moved. They were present, and then they weren't. On March 22, 2026, a surveillance team operating from a mobile unit in the commercial storage lot across from the Fort Wayne location documented this sequence at 1:47 a.m. A white cargo van with Ohio license plates turned into the rear service access road behind the building. 2 individuals exited. They were inside the building for 42 minutes. The van departed. Thermal sensors registered 4 new heat signatures on the second floor within 10 minutes of their entry. 3 nights later, at the same Fort Wayne location, a black SUV registered to a Louisville, Kentucky shell company arrived at 2:12 a.m. The 4 heat signatures on the second floor were gone within 20 minutes of that vehicle's arrival. 42 minutes to place, 20 minutes to retrieve. The logistics were structured and timed. This wasn't an ad hoc operation. Here's what most coverage of these cases doesn't address. How does a facility like this, operating with paying customers, licensed staff, routine health and safety inspections, and a public online presence, maintain an invisible secondary function for months without a single employee reporting something? The answer is in the staffing architecture. HSI investigators pulling employment records found that Jumpin Junction's overnight cleaning staff across all 7 locations were hired exclusively through staffing agencies. Placement schedules were deliberately rotated. No overnight maintenance employee was assigned the same building more than twice in any 2-week period. The assignment logs showed this was consistent across all 7 locations, with one documented exception. The Indianapolis flagship, dealing with cost pressures from its expanded North Wing, had been operating with a more stable overnight staffing arrangement since October of 2025. The same small rotation of workers covered the same building on a recurring basis. It was a cost reduction decision. Marcus T. had worked the same building on the same route for 4 consecutive months, long enough to notice that a sandal left outside a locked door in the middle of the night was wrong. By early April of 2026, HSI had accumulated enough surveillance data, movement logs, and van identification records to seek preliminary federal arrest warrants. But Carver recommended against moving immediately. Her reasoning was prosecutorial. The surveillance had documented intake, chill parks, It hadn't yet confirmed the downstream distribution network. To build a federal trafficking case that would survive prosecution, investigators needed the complete chain documented, not just one segment of it. So they waited. On April 17, 2026, a routine vehicle stop by Indiana State Police on Interstate 65 pulled over a white cargo van matching the profile of a Fort Wayne surveillance vehicle. The stop was random. The trooper had no knowledge of the investigation. He ran the plate through standard dispatch. The plate returned clean, a rental registration, properly filed. He conducted a visual exterior check and released the vehicle. Standard stop. Standard release. Standard report filed through standard channels. 48 hours later, the Fort Wayne location went dark. Thermal sensors, no signatures. Overnight vehicle activity, none. The van pattern stopped entirely. Carver concluded the network had detected the plate inquiry and interpreted it as a signal. Not a compromised investigation. The trooper had done nothing wrong and had no connection to the case. But somewhere in the logistics chain, someone was monitoring rental plate inquiries against a known fleet. The interstate stop had appeared as an anomaly. The team had a decision to make within 72 hours: execute raids immediately on existing evidence or hold in risk a prolonged dormancy period. They held. 6 days later, thermal sensors at the Indianapolis flagship registered signatures again. Different vehicle profiles at the rear access. Different arrival window. The operation had modified its patterns, rotated vehicle registrations, shifted timing, but it hadn't shut down. That adaptation told investigators something critical. An operation that can detect a random trooper's plate inquiry through operational monitoring and pause within 48 hours isn't an independent local enterprise. It has a command layer with active communications monitoring. Someone senior is watching for exactly this kind of signal and has the authority to redirect the network's logistics on short notice. The formal request. If you've been following this case and want to know what that FBI involvement revealed about the actual scale of what HSI had found, stay subscribed. Because the parks weren't the top of this structure. They were the intake layer. The network extended considerably further. Retention point, 50% mid-roll hook. In late April of 2026, a federal grand jury in Indianapolis issued sealed subpoenas for financial records tied to the Jumpin Junction holding company and 6 affiliated entities. The records took 2 weeks to assemble and fully process. When the analysis came back, it materially changed what investigators believed they were looking at. The 87 documented transfers referenced in sealed court filings weren't the complete operational count. They were the documentable minimum, entries directly traceable through digital payment records, cross-referenced against confirmed location logs and vehicle movement data. HSI financial analysts estimated the actual operational volume was between 120 and 150 transfers across all 7 locations since October of 2025. The holding company's revenue structure made that estimate credible. 7 trampoline parks operating at strong utilization rates, birthday party packages, school field trip contracts, open jump hourly passes, corporate event bookings were generating approximately $8.4 million annually in documented revenue. For a regional entertainment chain in the Indiana market, that's a viable business. Nothing about those numbers would trigger a standard financial services review. But the records showed a parallel income stream. 3 shell entities, Ohio registered, 1 Kentucky registered, 1 registered in the Cayman Islands, had received wire transfers from accounts traceable to Jumpin Junction operations totaling just under $19 million over 18 months. $19 million in undocumented income against $8.4 million in legitimate revenue. 2 to 1. Undocumented to legitimate. There's no entertainment business model that explains a 2 to 1 ratio of unexplained cash flow to documented operations at a regional trampoline park chain. When a single statistic exceeds the possible range for its category, the documented business isn't the actual business. A 26% return rate when the industry average runs 4 to 6%. A number that can only mean one thing. What strikes us about this case is how the concealment was structured. The parks weren't improvised cover. They were purpose-designed from the beginning as legitimate, professionally managed, genuinely well-reviewed businesses that happened to function simultaneously as operational nodes for a trafficking pipeline. That level of concealment requires money. It requires months of planning before the first foam pit was installed. Someone had long-term financing and long-term operational intent before a single location opened its doors. FBI Special Agent in Charge Raymond Hollis received his first briefing on the joint investigation on May 3, 2026. His first question was about the Chicago, Detroit, and Atlanta connections flagged in the earlier surveillance data. Cell tower analysis and partial vehicle logs suggesting outbound distribution to receiving nodes in those three cities. The answer: 2 Chicago area connections were under active investigation. A Detroit connection was probable but unconfirmed, and the Atlanta thread remained circumstantial. Hollis authorized a parallel financial investigation targeting the Chicago area structure. Within 11 days, 2 shell companies in the greater Chicago area had been positively identified as probable distribution nodes. A third entity remained under inquiry. Confirmed network reach: a minimum of 600 miles from the Indiana intake facilities. Hollis also authorized K-9 deployment with live person detection dogs for every entry team in the eventual raid. His reasoning was specific. The building blueprints for the Indianapolis flagship showed something that standard office search protocol wouldn't automatically address: the foam pits. Each foam pit at a Jumpin Junction location contained thousands of individual foam cubes. At the Indianapolis flagship, with its expanded north wing and 2 separate pit areas, that inventory ran to approximately 28,000 units. Standard foam cube replacement for a high-utilization commercial location should run 8 to 12% annually, roughly 2,000 to 3,400 cubes per year. The Indianapolis flagship had been ordering foam cube replacements at a rate of approximately 22% per quarter. Per quarter, not per year. At that rate, the facility was replacing its entire foam cube inventory every 4.5 months. HSI financial analysts cross-referenced the replacement orders against the location's documented usage data, insurance maintenance logs, and industry standard wear projections. The replacement rate didn't. The explanation investigators settled on: a significant subset of the foam cubes had been modified for cache storage and were being cycled out of inventory on a rotating basis, used modules extracted, fresh modules inserted, to prevent any single employee from developing familiarity with specific cubes over time. The modification itself, documented in the forensic evidence collected during the June 4th raid, was technically simple and nearly undetectable without direct examination. Standard commercial foam cubes, approximately 14 inches on each side, had a rear panel cut away and a waterproof polymer liner installed inside, the hollow core. Each liner was sized to hold approximately $3,000 in bundled bills without distorting the cube's external dimensions. The panel was resealed with industrial adhesive and was indistinguishable from an unmodified cube when placed face forward in the foam pit. The only way to identify and jumped into those cubes every Saturday afternoon. The thing is, this shouldn't have worked for as long as it did. On paper, a 22% quarterly replacement rate in a publicly reviewed business should have flagged an inventory anomaly during a standard insurance audit. The system held for at least 6 months. Routine maintenance staff checked foam pit inventory on a bi-weekly cycle. Modified cubes sat in an active family entertainment venue handled by employees on a 2-week rotation for half a year. Not one maintenance note flagged a structural irregularity. Not one employee filed an unusual inventory report. Federal charging documents would later name one Jumpin Junction shift supervisor in a parallel conspiracy count for obstruction. That supervisor had been assigned to the foam pit maintenance rotation. Did the system fail to catch this? Or is the lesson here that sufficiently patient concealment inside a legitimate business can hold indefinitely until someone with no stake in the secret happens to enough evidence to move? The trafficking operation at the Indiana locations was documented beyond the threshold required for federal charges. The financial architecture was fully mapped. The corporate chain, from holding company through franchise co-owners, through operating partners, through 3 shell entities, had been traced to its outer edges. A federal judge would issue arrest warrants within 48 hours of a properly documented application. The problem was the Chicago structure. 2 of the 3 identified Chicago area receiving entities were confirmed. A third remained under investigation, probable based on cell and financial data, but not yet documentable at the level required for a simultaneous arrest warrant application in the Northern District of Illinois. If the Indiana locations were raided without simultaneous action in Chicago, the receiving entities would have hours of warning. Federal trafficking networks don't shut down when one intake layer is neutralized. They route around it. New intake locations are identified. Operations rebuild within weeks under different management. The Chicago entities would disperse, liquidate, and reorganize before an Illinois warrant could catch up. Carver presented her recommendation to the Joint Command meeting on May 26th. Wait 2 additional weeks for positive confirmation of the 3rd Chicago entity. The risk was a second dormancy period at the Indiana locations, possible given the prior response to the I-65 plate inquiry, but not certain. The prosecutorial value of a fully documented, simultaneously executed multi-state operation outweighed the operational risk. Hollis disagreed. His counter-argument is documented in the meeting transcript and would become one of the more cited exchanges in the post-operation review. His position: the investigation's current surveillance data placed an active victim count at 19 individuals inside the operational system during any additional delay period. That wasn't an abstract risk metric. That was a specific human count against a specific proposed delay of 2 weeks. Here's the thing. The critics who later argued that Carver's proposed 2-week extension would have produced better prosecutorial outcomes in Chicago are technically correct about the Illinois side of the case, and operationally wrong about everything else. The cost they're discounting in those reviews isn't recoverable in a subsequent filing. Hollis made the right call. The go date was set for June 4, 2026. 4:17 a.m. Chicago federal authorities were notified and asked to begin emergency financial freeze procedures on the 2 confirmed entities. Procedures that could be executed simultaneously with the Indiana raids without a prior arrest warrant under asset forfeiture provisions that apply to probable cause financial seizure. The 3rd entity remained unaddressed. 3 days before the raid, the 3rd Chicago entity liquidated its primary accounts. Someone in the network had received a warning. The investigation into how that warning was transmitted remains ongoing. Pre-deployment surveillance began at midnight on June 4, 2026. Passive thermal monitoring confirmed all 7 locations showed no unusual activity as of 2 a.m. Staging teams were in position by 2:30. K-9 units, 2 per location, deployed separately from the main breach teams, were staged at secondary positions and would enter behind the first wave. At 3:45 a.m., all 7 team leaders reported ready on the Joint Command Net. 73 agents across 3 agencies, in position at 5 cities simultaneously. At 3:59 a.m., one complication arose. The Evansville team leader reported an unscheduled vehicle in the rear loading access area, a commercial truck, no markings consistent with any target vehicle, parked at an angle that suggested it had been stationary for hours rather than having arrived recently. The complication triggered a brief hold while an ancillary surveillance unit ran the plate. Commercial HVAC service vehicle, registered to a licensed contractor in Evansville. The driver had broken down the previous afternoon and arranged for a next morning pickup, leaving the truck overnight. No occupants. Non-threat confirmed at 4:12 a.m. The window was tight. 4 minutes and 45 seconds to the coordinated entry time. At 4:16 a.m., the Joint Command Net opened the synchronized countdown. 4:17 a.m. All 7 teams entered simultaneously. Retention point, 75% pre-climax. Fort Wayne. The ground floor cleared in under 90 seconds. K-9 units deployed to the second floor immediately behind the first wave. Both dogs indicated at the 2 office doors within 3 minutes of building entry. The left office door opened with standard entry tools within 90 seconds. The right office required a hydraulic ram. Neither had received food in a period investigators estimated at a minimum of 18 hours. Indianapolis flagship. The ground floor team secured the main arena and bathrooms, while a secondary 4-person team moved directly to the second-floor staircase. Thermal imaging logged 1 hour before breach had confirmed 4 active signatures in the East office. The East office door wasn't the door listed on the building permit. The permit described a standard commercial hollow core door with a keyed lever handle. What agents found was a solid core door, approximately 1 3/4 inches thick, with a commercial-grade deadbolt installed post-construction without permit documentation. The hydraulic girl, 14. The 14-year-old was standing near the east wall when the door came open. The 4-year-old was asleep on a folded blanket near the center of the room. One detail from the Indianapolis entry that stuck with me. The agent who entered that room first noted in her filing that she paused approximately 3 seconds after breach. Not because the scene was violent, because it was, in her words, domestic. Water bottles lined in a row against the south wall. An open cracker bag resealed with a rubber band. Shoes arranged near the door. Children impose order on their environment. The 14-year-old had used a permanent marker to write the word "help" in small letters on the inside surface of a cabinet door panel against the east wall. The letters were approximately 1 inch tall. The only way to see them was to open the cabinet door fully and examine the interior panel from the hinge side. She had written them at some point during her time in that room. She had no way to know whether anyone would ever open that specific panel. K-9 units deployed to the main floor at approximately 5:20 a.m. began working the foam pit areas. Both dogs indicated along the eastern pit wall within minutes. The first modified foam cube was identified and extracted at 5:35 a.m. Federal agents working the extraction process developed a system within the first 20 minutes. Remove cube, examine rear panel, document, and set aside. By 6:15 a.m., 168 confirmed modified cubes had been extracted, and personnel were continuing the systematic search. Final count at the Indianapolis flagship by 7 a.m., $4.2 million in bundled cash. 11 burner phones, all locked, transferred immediately to FBI digital forensics. 1 spiral-bound ledger in handwritten format, recovered from the East second-floor office, containing dated entries with 2-letter location codes, numerical designations, and what investigators described as confirmation marks consistent with a transfer record. The ledger covered October of 2025 through May 31st of 2026. 7 requiring immediate medical evaluation. All 19 transported to receiving facilities with trauma-trained personnel present for intake. 7 adults detained at or near the locations at time of entry. 11 additional arrest warrants executed across Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky by 7:30 a.m. Federal charges were filed in the Southern District of Indiana on June 5, 2026. 7 primary defendants, 3 franchise co-owners, 2 operations managers, the holding company's chief financial officer, and the logistics coordinator identified through the van surveillance record. Charges included conspiracy to commit forced labor trafficking, interstate transportation for the purposes of trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation. The mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for the primary conspiracy charges, combined with victim counts in the documented range, carry life imprisonment without possibility of parole. 3 of the 11 individuals named in supplemental arrest warrants had not been located as of the June 5th filing date. Federal fugitive status was entered for all 3. 1 is believed to have crossed into Canada within 48 hours of the raids. The other 2 remain unaccounted for in current federal records. The Chicago area financial freeze, executed simultaneously with the Indiana raids, secured approximately $2.1 million across the 2 confirmed shell entities. The third entity, the one investigators had been unable to fully confirm before the go date, had liquidated its primary accounts 72 hours before the raid. Someone in the network had received advance warning. The investigation into how that information was transmitted remains ongoing and has not produced charges as of this filing. Of the 9 through cross-reference with federal and state missing persons databases, by the close of June 7th, 6 remained unidentified as of the original filing date. Federal Victim Services personnel are working active identification cases on all 6. The 11 burner phones recovered from the Indianapolis flagship contain contact data that HSI Digital Forensics has characterized as indicating network connections to probable nodes in 2 additional states not previously identified in the investigation. Those leads are under active federal inquiry. The spiral-bound ledger's 87 entries represent documented transfers from October of 2025 through the end of May of 2026. Investigators believe the full operational period began earlier, potentially as far back as the initial park openings in early 2024. The evidence for the pre-October period is circumstantial and depends on cell tower records that are only partially recoverable at this stage. If the earlier timeline is confirmed through additional forensic work, it would represent approximately 12 months of operation before the first documentable ledger entry. 12 months before Marcus T. took his shift at the Indianapolis flagship. Before the staffing rotation that left the same worker in the same building long enough to notice something that wasn't supposed to be there. Do you think this network gets found without that specific coincidence? Marcus T. continues to cooperate with federal investigators. He's referenced in court documents only by his role and partial identifier. He no longer works overnight maintenance at entertainment venues. The foam cubes are cataloged and in federal evidence storage. The parks are closed by court order. The holding company structure has been dissolved. 7 owners and franchise managers are in federal custody awaiting trial. 3 individuals remain fugitives. 6 children since October of 2025. 87 documented times. Probably more. What came apart on June 4th, 2026, took 6 weeks of thermal surveillance, 8 months of parallel investigation, and one 19-year-old janitor to bring to a close. The network is dismantled. The demand that made it worth building still exists.